Okay, we're live.
Oh.
No, this is how it works.
Just a minute. Because I'm seeing that thing in the corner and I want my plant back on it if it's going to show that.
Okay. So, why don't you summarize decade number 1 for us? What was it like, 1 to 10?
Well, I was born in 1949.
You were born
in Missoula, Montana. My father was a carpenter, my mom a homemaker. I had 2 older sisters, Trina, who was 3 years older, and Marie, who was 6 years older. And then 3 years after I was born, twin little boys joined our family. And we lived in the same house my father built for those 10 years and 10 years even after that. And those years were just filled with 5 wild siblings and walking to school. We walked a mile to school and a mile home, even from the time we started in kindergarten. But we could not walk on the side of the road that had the irrigation ditch because children had drowned in that ditch. But they let us walk to school and back. And we would be creative and walk through horse pastures and stuff. We lived on 2526 Spurgeon Road. It's one of my passwords. Don't tell anybody.
What kind of student were you?
Crappy.
Really?
In fact, one of my earliest, I think on my first grade report card, I got a C in numbers. Yep.
Wow.
So math was not my forte, but I loved reading. I remember loving school. I loved the playground time, especially, like all kids do, even to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And in this one picture that I have, I'll come back to this picture, but a young man, a little boy that I was standing beside that I'll tell more about later. He came to be pretty important in my life later. I think our family really was a Leave It to Beaver. Mom always was dressed in a dress with the crisp apron, her hair perfect, the tables always set just right. We always had breakfast, lunch, and dinner together as a family. And my father, would leave and she would kiss him goodbye and kiss him hello when he came home. And she waited on all of us, hand and foot. So it was just very traditional, but we learned good work ethics in our home from young age. She taught us how to cook and to sew. We had our grandparents. One set was an hour away and the other set was in Missoula. So we had lots of aunts and uncles and grandparents around us. So family was a big deal. We were disciplined strictly. I think that my dad didn't love me, but I know he did in his own way, and he felt that was to make sure that we were raised in a way that would be respectful and honoring and obeying the law and getting good jobs and working hard. So we were raised Catholic, so we really didn't have that fellowship of a church body, kind of. We just kind of went and did our sacraments and came home. But Orchard Homes Country Life Club was a neighborhood where we'd get together and have potlucks and bingo and just neighborhood get-togethers. We would have different events going on, and style shows were something like this was just one. This was a little red flannel nightgown, and I don't know what the event was, but I modeled, and it was in the newspaper. And I just always thought that was the cutest child picture. When I was in probably close to the end of that first decade at 10 years old, I met my first best friend, and she had horses. And I started this love affair with horses at that time. I don't know if it was in this decade or the next decade, but my dream for years, I wanted to be a rodeo queen. 1960 to 1970, Those were ages 10 to 20. That's quite a span because I'm finishing elementary school, finishing high school, and finishing college in that decade. That's a lot of education for a girl who really didn't like education, but who grew up to become a teacher. First grade through 8th grade was all at Hawthorne Elementary School. And then I went to Hellgate High School in Missoula.
Such an awful name.
I know it's an awful name. And then I went to the University of Montana in Missoula. So I lived in the same home and in the same town for that complete decade, all of the education years. The rest of my elementary years were spent with that good friend that I spoke about in the first decade, and we ended up living in Horse World. Our family was a skiing family. We snow skied in the winter and we water skied in the summer, and I rode horses with my best friend, Jim. We would walk down to an empty lot in the neighborhood and we would play baseball by the hours after school with all the school kids. That was the other big activity. We loved music. We sang a lot together, and we loved performing for our mom and dad, especially at Christmas time. We'd always planned a grand program. Music was a very big deal. I was in all the choruses and all the musicals, so the drama musicals and special groups all the time. That was my big deal. We would go to rest homes often and senior centers and play and sing, because Mom just had that heart of loving on people who were lonely and who were hurting. So she taught us that, which is really ingrained. It's a part of who I am. My best friend in high school and I, who since she became my sister-in-law eventually, but she and I and this other young lady, we, for I think 3 out of the 4 years in high school, for prom, homecoming, and all that we would always get selected. We would be running against each other for prom queen or princess or whatever it was. And all 3 years, we lost to Florence McBride.
The heck is Florence up to now?
The first job I had, we did babysit our neighbors for 25 cents an hour, but the other big profit-making business that we had was picking raspberries. And in high school, at that time I took business classes. My dad would take me downtown, drop me off, and just expect me to go door to door and fill out applications and have a job. And I did, all the time. I worked at a TV station, I worked at a dentist's office, I worked at Montgomery Ward's in retail, and really loved working. I really didn't have any idea about going to college, but Dad said, we live in a college town, and I can pay for your college if you will live at home and go to college here in town. So I thought, well, I don't have any better plans. I think I was there more to party than anything else. I joined a sorority because there were fraternities. It wasn't for anything more than that. I never even considered being a teacher, even though my siblings and I, we would play teacher at home. That was one of our things to play, was school. When I declared my elementary education major, for the first time in my life, I started pulling A's and B's. The first time in my life, I felt like I had a dream and a vision, and my whole personality seemed to change. It just said, I don't have time for the partying anymore. There's more important things to do with my life. And it was the first time in my life too that I felt like my father really approved of me. I remember having conversations as a young adult, because now here I am 18, 19, 20, and he's hearing me, and his eyes are glistening with pride that his little girl is finally finding her way in life. In the summer of my junior year, I was in a teaching elementary music methods class. And the room was full of women, of females, and one guy. And his name was Jerry Chud. And he was just a clown. He was hysterical. He just made everybody laugh. It was a fabulous class because he was there. We were friends for the next couple of years. I was still very young and restless and needed to have my own life. And I didn't want to be committed to one guy at that time in my life. So that happened in the next decade. No, 1970 to 1980, age 20 to 30. Jerry fell in love with me at first sight. He was 5 years older than me and ready. We were pretty into the party life. He was an entertainer, and I love to be entertained. Well, after 2 years of him being in Alaska and me being in Montana, and we corresponded through cassette tapes and reel-to-reel tapes and an occasional phone call and lots of letters, and realized this was a really good guy. And June 12th, 1971, we got married. We were married in Missoula, in my parents' backyard, and lived there that summer. And then we took jobs in Metlakatla, Alaska. We were there for 4 years. I turned 21 that August. I was so young, so idealistic. I had no idea that this was a whole different culture. First time away ever from home. First year of marriage. First year of teaching. I cried a lot. The next year we were married, we did go to Europe. We bought bikes in London and toured Europe for 2 months. And that's one of the pictures you see here. Again, young and idealistic. We didn't know bikes. So we go over there with our backpacks that are up about this high and buy these, the wraparound handlebar bikes where you're like this. And we drive down the road about 2 blocks and go, I'm not going to be able to pick up my head. We were friends with some people who lived in the Matanuska Valley, and so we would come up skiing over spring break, and we really fell in love with it. We loved it and thought this could be the right place. It's close to a city. We were very, very much isolated in Metlakatla, so we were excited to move up here. So you see pictures of 3 homes that we lived in. The first home we lived in the Butte area off of Smith Road. We house sat, or actually property sat, for some friends, and our pipes froze that winter, and we moved out the next year, bought this little fix-up house out on mile 51 of the Parks Highway, close to Big Lake Turnoff, and outgrew that house pretty quick. We were there for 4 years, and then moved into 5075 Shenham Drive. I lived in for 40 years. When I was in Metlakatla, I got very sick and found out I had a tubular pregnancy. And so they took out my ovary and a tube and didn't know whether I'd even be able to have children. And at that time, too, in our lives, we partied and were having a great time and traveling, making good money. But we both knew with kind of our backgrounds that something was missing in our lives, and we thought maybe it is God. So when we came to the valley, we just started church hopping. And in 1976, we stopped off at a little church called Kedron. One of my grandsons is named for that church. It's Farm Loop. The love of the Father just smacked us both big time, and we fell madly in love with Jesus. And during the time of just getting to know him, I was again, I had a cyst on my ovary, and we thought, here we go again, I'm going to lose the other ovary here. And an evangelist came to town. He prayed over us. He prophesied over us. And the prophecy was that there was a treasure within me. And the next week when I went to my doctor appointment, there was no cyst and I was pregnant. Jerry and I were baptized in water together. We were baptized in the Holy Spirit together. And we began our family. And that's when I stopped teaching, because I felt this is my destiny, is to be a wife and a mom. This is what I want to be. This is what I want to do. I just loved being a wife and a mom. It was great fun. Being a mom of these 3 precious little boys and taking care of my man. Ages 30 to 40 years. They're crazy parenting years. We're raising our kids. Jerry wanted to write music so badly when he was in college and when he was entertaining in the bars and stuff, but he just said he never could. But after he came to know the Lord, it just flowed out of him. There was a ministry formed called Restoration, and Jerry started singing. He felt especially led to men in churches, especially pastors who were burned out. And then I started singing with him, and we loved singing together. So that love of music that was very important to me, that I grew up with, was still there. The boys, Brian, Aaron, and Nathan, had incredible musical talent too, so they were great little singers, and they started singing with us and stole the show away, of course, as you can imagine. They were so adorable, and Jerry would write special songs right for them, like God Don't Make No Junk. We went to a lot of different churches and sang, and to different camps, and it was a busy time with the Ministry of Restoration. Randy Davies and I met and became fast friends many years ago. We realized we wanted to exercise, and so we went to this workout session called Jazzercise, and we loved it. It was really great. We thought we could do this ourselves and put it to Christian music and have people, come to our classes. And so we spent hours choreographing and just had a blast with that. It lasted for about 12 years. Great. I had grown up skiing, and that was one thing I really wanted for our family too. We started off cross-country skiing, and there came a time where they just wanted a little bit more speed, and we took up downhill skiing then. That was a favorite activity of all of us. During these years, we spent time, every summer we would go down to Montana for summers to be with family down there, and that was always special, the times that we had with all of the cousins. 12 boys and 1 girl.
Wow. Boys
run high in this line. Oh, these were the years too of Sun City Singers and Puppeteers, a small group of kids that tried out, and we put on performances and
Aaron was quite the puppeteer, wasn't he?
He doesn't want to be known for his puppeteering.
My bad. I'll make sure to edit this part out.
We had fallen in love with going to different camps. Mm-hmm. All of our boys went to Little Beaver Lake Camp, and we served at camp. We ran children's church pretty outrageously, but the camps were special, and we heard, I can't remember how we heard about Crossroads Range, but before we knew it, we had called back there, and they said, yeah, come on out. We'll put you to work. You can just come out and serve. So we said, Lord, if this really is you, we need these things to get there. And that day we headed off to town, and we got all those things and more, and took off a few weeks later for North Dakota. It was a dude ranch, so the horses showed up in my life again. We're 1990 to 2000. I'm getting old. 40 to 50. The boys started playing soccer way back when they were 5, really. And so we were very involved in that through the years as well. And so this decade was no different. We continued chasing soccer around. We went to the World Cup in '94. It was a really big highlight. Taking the trip down the California coast, and every beach I said, "Stop! This is the most beautiful beach yet." It drove my family nuts. But it was a wonderful memory. 1995, we started emptying out the nest, and that was brutal. That was brutal for us. It's hard sending your first one off. It's kind of like sending your first one off to kindergarten. That's brutal too. And the next year, Jerry was considering, well, he did. He put in for retirement. He had been working all these years and just had this passion to go into deeper ministry. So with my blessing, I said, let me go back to teaching, and you go run after your dream. In December, he put in for his resignation, and in February he was diagnosed with melanoma cancer. But he had an appointment this week, and then we went off to our conference, and he said, yeah, everything was fine. But at the conference, one of the questions at the breakout time was, have you ever kept anything from your spouse? And I said, no, I feel that I've been really honest with you. We've had an open relationship. And I said, what about you? And he goes, my heart leapt, and I thought, what do you mean, well? And he said, I wasn't completely honest with you when I said that everything was fine at the doctors. And that's how he told me. I remember that drive home from Anchorage being really a long one. And I don't know if it was the same night, but it was close to it, where we sat down with our boys and told them. And Jerry said, it's okay. I'm ready to be with the Lord, but I don't want to leave this precious time in my boys' lives. I want to meet their wives. I want to be there to see them graduate and get married and know my grandchildren. And we just all cried together. What can you do? And we believed for a magic bullet all the way through. We spent that summer chasing after a cure. We were in Mexico. It was our trip to Mexico. We were in California, Santa Monica, California, on our 25th wedding anniversary. And November 1st, he went home to be with the Lord. And he was way too young. He was only 51. It was, well, buck up, Lynda. You got to get these kids through the rest of their growing up years and launch them. It looked like courage, but I was scared to death, because I remember teaching, and then I'd come home and just lay down on the couch and cry, because you're putting on a tough face, you're being courageous, and then it's just rough. We had been going to Assemblies of God, Wasilla Assemblies of God, for 18 years, since Brian was born. And our church was hurting. It was falling apart. It was splitting. And Brenda and Dennis, I didn't know them. They called. Brenda called one day and said, can we do meals for you? And that spoke huge, as you can imagine. And I knew that I was going to be taken care of. And so after Jerry died, I started going to Crossroads. I said, I cannot do this alone, and I started Bethmore Bible Study in my home and had a solid following group. We were together for many years through, I have a whole big box full of Bethmore Bible studies that we did. and it was my life saving at that time. I was forced to be in the Word. I was forced to fellowship. It was great. And the other thing that helped me so much was I started hiking. Good old Charlie Yoder said, "Hey, how about we start hiking with the youth, and can we take this name, the Peak of the Week Club, because I like that." And backpacking, and yeah, it was a whole new world for me, and I loved it. 2010, ages 50 and 60. I was back into teaching, lots of years there of teaching. When I had gone back the decade before, I had gone back and taught middle school for 4 years, and then I came back to elementary school, which was absolutely fabulous. I taught with Mita Botchin at middle school, and Mita and I in middle school, we ended up taking a couple of mission trips. We went to Greece, and we did a little ministry trip to Mexico. But that was my beginning ventures of kind of missions and stepping out on my own beyond the borders. Started cleaning out the house, all garage sales. Here's a wonderful picture of Trina and Randy and I, which is kind of a foreshadowing of other times to come. Just every summer we would have a hearty garage sale and just start paring down. My kids thank me for it now. Jerry and I, oh gosh, we loved, and I still love being a parent, but we knew that there were little girls waiting for our little boys, and we started praying for those girls. Each of the boys found those girls all at about the same time, except for Nathan, which he knew from the age of 4 that Marissa was his. Brian met Bree at college, and Aaron met Carla at YWAM, and both Bree and Carla came up and spent time with me for a period of time. It was a beautiful fit, and in 2002 they were all married. We had their engagement pictures were all in the paper at the same time that said 3 sons, 3 states, 3 weddings. So all in the same year, just months apart from each other. I was glad that I wasn't the mother of girls. I couldn't have ever dreamed for anything more beautiful than these 3 daughter-in-laws I love with all my heart. The boys and girls talked about wanting to, when they started their families, to all start them together so that the kids would all be the same age. But Aaron and Carla were ready to go, so we welcomed in Ashton and Ava, and we were all delighting in them. That I decided that I would run a half marathon every year of my 60s, and I pretty much made it. It was during this time too that I went to my 40th class reunion. And remember way back when I was talking about my first decade, and in that little picture of my first grade classroom was a little boy that I was standing next to. And I met up with him again in my 40th class reunion, and we really hit it off. And but suffice it to say, we had a 2-year relationship that we thought was going to end in marriage, and it didn't. And it was a really, really rough time for me. And so letting go of that dream was a really hard one for me. And where I had grieved losing Jerry, this was another loss that was really, really difficult for me. I that ends up kind of leading into the next decade, because the next decade was when it goes into retirement. And I went, I'm retired, I'm out of love, I have no children around, what am I going to do? Who am I? And so I kind of came to that end of that whole decade where, there were some of the happiest days of my life, becoming a grandma for the first time, seeing my children happily married and launching off onto their own life paths. And now here I was. And it was scary. The seventh decade, 2010 to 2020. Yeah. Ages 60 to 70. The big year. Wow. I hinted at it at the end of the last decade. That decade went out with just me in a state of, who am I? What am I going to do with the rest of my life? I feel so confused with what's going on. I retired that year, 2009, and I just said I need time. And I left Alaska and decided to spend 3 weeks each first with my family in Montana, and then 3 weeks with each of my kids where they were at that time. Then coming back to the States, I thought, well, Trina has been down in Redding. My sister Trina was in Redding going to school, and she talked about that, there's classes here to do teaching English as a second language. And I went, that's what I need. I'll probably end up on the mission field. I need that tool. So I decided to move in and do that training. But lo and behold, I got caught up in this Bethel bubble. And long story short, I ended up being a student at Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry for 2 years, and the third year I spent in Ecuador. Those years were quite a turning point for my life. Were years of really looking at how I had done my relationship with the Lord, and realizing I lived a lot of it as an unbelieving believer, saying the words but not really truly believing it in my heart, especially in terms of how I looked at myself, learning about the power and authority I have as a believer to do things that are supernatural. I learned about justice and the things that really hurt the heart of God the most is the injustice that goes on all over the world. In Ecuador, that's exactly what the outreach was all about. It was about working with the girls on the streets, and in the feeding centers, and in the prisons, and in the safe homes where the girls had been trafficked. And I came back to Wasilla going, okay, Lord, I have been worked over, and I am so yours. Show me what is here for me. But I found this place called My House, which is a drop-in center for homeless teens, and for the last 5 years, that's where my heart is there with those young adults. Gosh, and the cream on the topping of just feeling so fulfilled in who I am is my children have blessed me with more grandchildren. First of all came Lincoln, and then twin Kedron and Cohen. They were born in Northern Ireland, so I got to go and spend 3 months with them. And Owen and Emerson were born across the sea in Beirut. Everything, life beautiful. But a few years ago, I just started feeling poorly, and it was cancer knocking at my door. And I went through 6 months of chemotherapy, and met with Jesus in a way that I never really had before. The first part, when I was first diagnosed, was really giving up my control, really letting Him carry me in this. And that was a whole another period of grief for me, was realizing how selfish I had been to just really not totally be able to fall back on Him and trust Him, where it was probably the scariest time of my life. He met me in those still dark hours in the night when Jerry was sick, and when he left, I always talked about feeling like I was cocooned in His love, that I felt such sorrow, but I felt such joy. And this cancer journey was very similar. I just knew that no matter what happened, that I was safe. It's His faithfulness. It's the history of all these years, coming to give my heart to Jesus when I was 26 years old. And here I am pushing 70, and recognizing that His faithfulness, that His wraparound presence is just always there. That how can I lose? He is trustworthy. He is faithful. He's true. Last year, when Nathan came home and bought the home that I'd lived in for 40 years. I moved here, my own little house, just 5 minutes away, 443 Sarah Circle. Talked about Isaiah 4:4-3, about, your children will be a wellspring of life. Is that the way it goes? Pretty much. And they are. They are.
What do you still want to accomplish in life?
I told Ava I want to dance at her wedding. I need to be here for my grandchildren. My children told me when I was down with cancer, and I didn't think I could do this chemo thing. And the kids said, "Mom, would you do it for your grandchildren?" And I didn't have to think twice about that. I said, I'll do that. I'll do that. Oh, but I have that great sense of justice that's in me too, for the injustices of the world that really piss me off. And so in this season of my life, it's my grandchildren and these kids at my house.
How would you describe the journey of getting older? What's it been like for you?
My mom said, getting old isn't for sissies. After this cancer thing, it's true. It is. And yet, I see my mom, and I thought my mom was beautiful. She lived till she was 94, and I still just love to hold her hands and see her crinkly wrinkles, and I thought she was beautiful. And so when I look in the mirror and I think, oh, this is not good, this is not looking good, I just choose to see my mom.
How do you want to be remembered when you're long gone? How do you want to be remembered?
And she loved well.